Joe Biden unveiled his budget. I guess it was yesterday. And I have to say, as far as these documents go, and again, it's not going to be approved by Republicans, and it probably wouldn't have been approved by Joe Manchin if the Republicans hadn't controlled the House. But it's a pretty good looking budget, as it were.
It's excellent. I mean, it's exactly what you would hope that a Democratic president would propose. And as you say, it's not going anywhere. These presidential budgets usually don't go anywhere, even if they have a big majority in Congress. There's so many things that enter into whether or not, it's going to be approved. Everybody's got their own hobby horses and what have you. But what it does do, and it's especially important at this point in the election cycle, is that it has the president putting out his or her priorities, and setting the stage for the economic agenda for the Democratic Party going forward. And to that extent, this is I can't say that I'm unhappy with what he put out, because if that's the case, if that's where they're going, they're not backing off on the economic issues that they were pushing in the first 2 years, and are basically going to push forward with presenting those things to the public as the Democratic platform and economic platform and agenda. So it's, I think it's pretty good news to the extent that it does that. It's not going to pass, obviously. We're about to go into a complete nightmare of a showdown over here over the debt ceiling, and all this stuff is going to fall away. But at least he's put out a marker. This is what we believe in. And these guys over here, let's see what they come up with.
And I just want to add one caveat to this. The defense part of this budget is absurd. I mean, it was absurd 5 years ago when it was $770 billion. And it's been absurd every time after that, every time Congress has added more money than sometimes even the administration has asked. This time, he decided to get out in front of it and ask for more money. It's something like almost $850 billion. It is extraordinary, the amount of money that we spend on defense. A lot of this is like, sort of a ramp up against China. It feels like we should say that Australia just recently made a deal to do nuke subs with the U.S. as a sort of like a vague threat to China. I mean, so we should say that this is with that caveat.
I assume, by the way, that some of that had to be sort of trying to get, put a marker out there for the Ukraine policy as well. I don't know that to be true, but I assume that that's part of it, which is saying, we're going to continue to spend this money. And some of it I almost thought was just a political thing. Not that I'm giving them any excuses, because Democrats and Republicans both are always ridiculous on this, the defense budget, but
I just think it needs to be said in the larger context of like the reopening of those Philippines military bases. That being another deal with Australia. And then, of course, we actually had someone on yesterday to talk about how, like, the United States' attempt to broker normalized relations between Japan and South Korea is another way we're increasing this militarization against China. And I think it's concerning, but.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. And there's not a lot of discussion or debate about it. I don't think people understand it. It's all being it's just being done. And, I don't think that look, this is bipartisanship in action here, I think, and that's, and in the sense of China, there's no dissent, even from the wingnut Republicans. They're even worse than the Democrats on this. So that is something to be watching out for, and it could get very dicey over the next few years. But aside from that, and that's a lot, and, I agree, you have to discuss this when you're discussing this budget, because this is a huge amount of money, and there isn't any much dissent about it. So that's one of the problems. But the rest of it, as far as the domestic program is concerned, it seemed to me that Biden had all the right priorities and was willing to come out and say, we're going to tax people. He's raising taxes on wealthy people. He's raising the cap on the Medicare contributions to shore up the Medicare program. These are real things. And he's basically saying, look, this is how we do this. People want all this good stuff. They really do, even though the Republicans will say they don't want it. This is how we're going to do it. And he's raising taxes on wealthy people and corporations in order to finance a decent 21st century society at home. And meanwhile, the other side is just going, we only care about our people. We don't care about anybody else in the world. And yet they're going to, this budget that they're going to come out with, probably it's going to be another couple months because they really don't know what to do, the Republicans.
Well, I would just add on the defense thing. And again, there is also this element of, now he's filling it full. A lot of that money is spent on woke stuff. But no,
it's all very, very woke. It's super awake. Yeah.
With the Republicans basically pretending that they're going to cut the defense budget, and they're going to cut woke stuff, it actually creates an incentive for him to inflate those numbers so that maybe they get to a deal by cutting some of those numbers. I mean, they're
never going to do that. They're never going to do that.
I mean, that's the thing, is that invariably what happens is everybody signs on, but then it's, of course, a political loss for the Republicans in that sense, because they were prancing around talking about how much of the wokeness they were going to cut from the military budget. So we should just say.
And I would also guess that they're doing it slightly for the benefit of some of those, Democrats in moderate districts, to give them a chance to they can roll, but say, well, we didn't go along with all that big spending and cut it back a little bit. There's always that element in there where they're trying to give those frontline districts or whatever. And, the Senate, which, keep your eye on this, because there are a bunch of senators in red states that are up in 2024. They're very worried about it. People like Tester and Sherrod Brown and others, Democrats in red states who are, they are definitely have a battle on their hands. And so they're trying to give them some room to be, to pretend to be conservatives. I mean, that's basically what that's all about. So that factors in.
But everything else you said, I mean, he's basically rolled out a lot of the Build Back Better stuff. Yeah. Now, again, it's not going to pass in this form. It wouldn't have passed even if he had control of both houses. But it does shift where the conversation is, shift into what is this is about as sort of corporate-y, mainstreamy a Democrat who's been in the Senate for 50 years, burnishing those credentials. And he's coming out with $2 trillion over 10 years for childcare, pre-K, community college, Medicaid, as you say, and more. $4 trillion, $2 trillion of deficit reduction. I personally am not so exercised about deficit reduction, but I like it insofar as it can function. Deficit talk can function in two different ways, right? Deficit talk can function as a way for corporatists, Republican corporatists. Sometimes it's redundant. And, some of these sort of so-called moderate Democrats who are really conservatives. It gives them an opportunity to cut programs for people. But deficit reduction right now is being utilized by the Biden administration as a call to raise taxes on wealthy people. And I like those taxes being raised on wealthy people because it impacts income disparity.
Yes.
And so this, and you and I, Heather, have been railing on the deficit hawkery for years because we know that it's been a sort of fig leaf for cutting programs. Here, I think it's the first time you and I have ever seen a budget that you see the deficit hawkery being used as a justification for raising taxes. And that's, I love that. I mean, I don't, again, I'm not so worried about the deficit, but if it can be employed to use as a cudgel to raise taxes, then great. But the only danger, I guess, is that we still have not tackled the question of the deficit. But I don't know who's going to do that. Like, I'm going to dedicate my presidency to making the American public understand they shouldn't be so deficit panicked. Like, what's the, that's a lot of, that seems to a high price to pay. And I'm not sure what the return is in the short term on that.
I'm not sure either. I mean, there's the whole modern monetary theory, the MMT thing about the deficit, which is persuasive to me. But it's complicated, and it's not an easy thing to sort. It's counterintuitive to, I think, most people. It was to me, and I finally had to, sort of delve in and get it. But I think I agree with you. I mean, I think for the most part, this is just going to be something that's always going to be part of our, political, debate, mainly because of modern monetary theory, which says that deficits don't really matter. And they don't. So nothing will be done, and we'll just keep arguing about it and then just keep going forward. I mean, there's just no appetite anywhere for anybody to actually do something about it, mainly because it doesn't really matter. So we just kind of keep going forward with it. It's kind of a kabuki dance that people do. So to that extent, I totally agree with you. I hadn't even thought about this. But that's absolutely right. What putting, taxing the wealthy, for a completely different purpose, by the way. I agree with you completely. Income inequality is a problem in itself, regardless of where the money is going. Massive problem. So trying to equalize that by whatever means they can do that, if it's going toward this kabuki dance of deficit reduction, I'm fine with that, because we really have to do something. That our society is so out of balance now, economically speaking. I mean, you live in a city, so do I. You walk down the street and you see it right in front of your eyes. Yep. Multi-million dollar, buildings and homes and whatever, with, a vast number of homeless people living on the street. It couldn't be more stark. This has got to be dealt with in some way. And one of the ways you have to do it is to sort of, I think, just find a way to equalize however you do it, because on the merits, it's a good idea no matter where the money goes. So I'm with you on that. And I hadn't even thought about that, but that was, I mean, I don't know that that's a motivation on the part of the administration, but I kind of think it might be. I mean, they've got economists there who are looking at income inequality. They have to be seeing it.
Yeah, I don't know if they even think it's going to happen, but I think the idea that they, the idea of the wealthy paying their fair share is something you heard even like Bill Clinton talk about.
Absolutely.
And this was not a guy whose policies were in any way inhibiting of wealth inequality. I mean, to really tackle wealth inequality, you need to have a much higher top marginal rate than even Biden is talking about here. But if you're going to accept the premise that the deficit is a problem and that it's irresponsible not to address the deficit, I like the idea of the responsible way to address the deficit is to tax wealthy people so that they don't, so that they pay down the deficit, but really it's so that they don't have as much money.
Right.
I mean, that's basically it. I mean, we should be doing this. We should be doing, we should be doing it with a wealth tax, frankly, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. I mean, we used to talk about this all the time. In the 50s, wasn't it? It's like a 90%.
In the 50s and the 60s, leading up to Jack Kennedy, every dollar made over, at that time, about $470,000 was taxed at 90%, equivalent to $3 million today.
Seems fine to me. I mean, I'd be happy if that's what it takes to, if that's making America great again, if that's what they're talking about, count me in. I mean, that's the days that Trump people all want to go back to. Well, that's one aspect of it I could sign on to for sure.
Without a doubt. That is, but I don't know if we're going to get there so much.
Well,
but
at least they're trying something. I mean, they're not completely going over to the other side as we've seen so many times before. So
exactly.
That's starting off giving it away.
And there's two ways to tighten that belt, I guess. One is to make cuts. The other is to do enough exercise that you're not taking I can't. I don't even know how to. I don't know what the analogy is there. That's too much.
Well, I think one of the things that this may be one of the strange sort of positive benefits of Trumpism, which is that he's come in with this populist, kind of notion. And his populism is completely all over the place. It's in code. It's mostly culture war. But nonetheless, there is this sort of an element there with his support for Social Security and Medicare and some various things that may somehow be penetrating a little bit into the to our social consciousness about the idea that that it's not that all these rich people are getting away with murder. I mean, they had managed to brainwash a lot of the right wing in this country for many, many years to believing. And I remember hearing people on Rush Limbaugh's show calling in and saying, well, I just want my boss not to pay more taxes because that means I'll get more money. I mean, that's a brainwashing, bullshit, right? Completely nuts. And maybe this is sort of shifting that just a little bit. Yes, Donald Trump is rich and they worship him, but maybe over time there'll be a little bit more consciousness about this. I mean, I don't hold out a lot of hope, but it's maybe a slight inroad somewhere in there to kind of disassociating this in their minds, the idea in their minds that rich people really need to keep every penny of their money, that it's a benefit to them.
I am less optimistic about that. Although I just think that, like, let's put it this way, deficit reduction has always been a cudgel whenever it comes up, has always been a cudgel used to cut programs for people. Yep. And it's always been weaponized by the right. They forfeited that over the course of the Trump years. Paul Ryan was essentially, excommunicated from the party, as it were. Paul Ryan's a liability to Ron DeSantis even today. Yeah. And so if deficit reduction has been orphaned on the right, and it is adopted by the nominal left, by the Democrats, let's say, as a mechanism in which to increase taxes, that in and of itself, that shift means that we can save our powder for other fights, right? Because that's headed in the right direction. And it feels like as long, the real issue has always been those, supposed bipartisan special committees that are supposed to come take a look at the deficit or whatever it is, or, Barack Obama, we need to tighten our belt and this and that. If we can get away from that rhetoric, and we don't have to fight that rear guard fight, essentially, from the Democratic Party. And when they talk about deficit reduction, all they're talking about is taxation. That's a good thing. That means that, totally there's other resources to deploy other places to have fights.